Good afternoon and welcome to the Care Manager and Provider Information Session Series. This is Amanda Harper, the Assistant Statewide Care Manager Coordinator. Today's session will be on employment services and the life planning process. Just a reminder that these are the second and fourth Wednesday of each month. Last session on choices, CCO enrollment, transfer, and disenrollment is now available on the website for reviewing. The next session following this one will be session 5 on April 24th. It'll be titled Self-Direction and the Development of the Life Plan and Staff Action Plan, and review self-directed services and how they're represented in both of those plans. You can find the link to the registration and these recordings at the link at the bottom of this slide. Questions will be answered at the conclusion of this PowerPoint. If you have questions that were not answered within this presentation, we ask that you follow up with your CCO leadership, and also feel free to contact the OPWDD regional office staff for further guidance if your leadership asks you to do so. So without further ado, I'll introduce Julia Kelly, and she will be talking today on Introduction to OPWDD Employment Services and how those are represented in the Life Plan and Staff Action Plan. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you. My name is Julia Kelly, and I'm the Developmental Disabilities Policy Development Specialist for OPWDD Employment and Meaningful Community Activities Unit. Today, the focus of the training will be employment services and the life planning process. So we'll cover an intro to employment services, the care manager and employment services collaboration, the enrollment process for employment services very briefly, and the required documentation, which includes life planning and brief overview of staff action plans. So just to take a moment to do an overview of employment services, there's been many, many changes over the last 4 or 5 years. And I just want to kind of briefly explain where we are now today, and just a brief explanation as to why we've made some of the changes that we've made. So what does it take to be successful in community employment? Community employment is different than attending a typical program. You know, the staff and the person with a disability are dealing with businesses that have business needs, and it's extremely important for people to know what their skills are and be matched to the right job. So we'll talk about some of the changes we've made to improve that process. The overall programs that OPWDD Employment Services offers are community-based pre-vocational services, which offers career planning, community work experiences, and building work skills. We have Pathway to Employment, which is a time-limited program, but also offers career planning, community work experiences, and ends the program with a career and vocational plan. OPWDD offers the Employment Training Program, which is ETP, the acronym, which offers, again, career planning, work experiences, and job internships that lead to employment, and is funded by supported employment funding. We offer supported employment. SEMP is the acronym for that, gained and maintained no employment. Supported employment also offers 2 different types of employment: intensive SEMP when the person is not employed, and extended SEMP when the person is employed. So the key ingredients for success in competitive employment are discovery. Discovery is one of the things that we built into all the different services and created some new services, which I'll talk about in a minute. So discovery is the process of getting to know what the person is capable of, what they want to do, and what supports they need. And we've built that into the community-based pre-vocational services, Pathway, and ETP. The next main ingredient for successful employment is developing good job matches. So making sure that we're learning business needs and matching them with the needs and skills and interests of the person. And those activities are typically done in ETP and SEMP. And finally, job coaching supports. So we've added statewide staff training and lots of, we've expanded the billable services that are provided in SEMP in order to meet the needs of people to become very confident at the jobs that they acquire. So how do employment services staff provide discovery services? Typically, it's person-centered and career planning. You're learning about the individual, so there's lots of different activities. It's interviewing people who know that person best. It's observing that person in various different settings, as well as really learning about the person's history and their family culture, and what are their current skills, et cetera. Community work experiences are a very, very important part of discovery. A lot of times people may think that they want to do a particular type of job, but until they actually experience it, they don't really know, what it is they want to do and what setting as well. So they may not be exposed to a lot of different types of jobs. So once people go and try different types of jobs and then try some of those work in different settings, it's much easier for that person themselves to understand where they want to work and what they can do and what they want to do. We can also, in most of the discovery services, build on people's skills. So if somebody wants to work in a customer service related industry, they can learn some of the skills around that. Lots of career development and exploration activities, and most of the services also end with a plan for next steps. So the next step might be job development if the person, kind of identified what they like to do and had the skills to do those types of jobs, or it might be to gain further skill development or address some employment challenges prior to seeking employment. So for OPWDD, the goal is really to make a long-range plan. So since we've introduced discovery, we've seen the employment rates go up, which we'll talk about soon. So discovery is put into place so that employment services are finding jobs that better match people, and we're seeing employment success. We're seeing the job retention rates go up. We've added staff training, statewide staff training, so we've seen coaching supports increase. We're seeing stronger job development and job matching, and services now have specific tasks built in to get to know the job seeker better. When we developed and made the changes to all the services a few years ago, we looked at the data, and the data was showing us the different reasons why people weren't retaining jobs. We had noticed that up until 2015, the employment rates were very stagnant and that the growth for people getting and retaining jobs was very slow. So we looked at the data to see where was it that we needed to put some, effort and kind of boost our services, and noticed that some of it was the person didn't have the skills for the job. Some people needed to work on stress management skills or some interpersonal skills. Other people didn't really understand the financial impacts of working on their benefits. Some of those are kind of misperceptions, and some of them are actual challenges. And there was dissatisfaction with job, which meant that the person either really didn't like that work, even though they thought they would, or they may have done it for a long period of time and were ready to move on. So those are a lot of the reasons why we built in the discovery process and increased those services within the services we provide. So again, like we said, the employment training program offers discovery. The employment training program offers more of a modified discovery, so it's up to 90 hours, and includes 2 community work experiences. So typically, that's for people who have some work experience and are, pretty close to being able to start working soon, but need discovery. ETP also offers some other benefits, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Pathway is for people who have had some experiences, but no discovery, and really need that full discovery to find out what makes sense for that person. Again, at the end of any of these discovery services, it may be that the person needs to work on more skills, or they may need to kind of boost experiences, maybe volunteer experiences to get their foot in the door. So it's not always going to be recommended that employment is the next step. But again, you can kind of move through some of these services as needed to build those work skills. And we'll talk about that, how you can combine services in a minute. And then the third discovery service that we provide is community-based pre-vocational services. And those services are typically for individuals that need more than 1 year of skill building and discovery services in order to move towards employment. Those are typically ongoing services as needed. The discovery process also includes community work experiences, but they're typically longer term. So it could be a kind of longer term volunteer or a series of unpaid work experiences in addition, as well as taking classes in skill building. So how do employment services staff provide job matching services? Again, this is a brief overview, but the job developers should always be taking the discovery outcomes and using that plan to guide all of their work. So it's important for the job developers to stay pretty focused on the plan. The plan should typically also have a first job preference and a second job preference in case the first job preference isn't available at that time. But it also includes, what is the range, geographical range with transportation options, what environments does the person work best in. The person and the care planning team are involved in the job match process as well as job development activities. So employment is one of those services that we always say it takes a village. In order for a person to be successful in employment, they need to have transportation to and from the job. They need to have oftentimes the right uniform or the right clothing. They need, certain lunches. They need to be able to structure, other activities around employment. There's a lot of really care planning team activities for a person to be successful, not just the job coach and the employment service. So a lot of those activities are also kind of delegated as well. Alternative job possibilities are identified, like we talked about, and the job developer seeks to understand the business needs and matches them with the person's needs, skills and abilities. Once a job is identified, job coaches provide coaching at the work experiences. They develop clear instructional strategies with the goal of building independence and slowly fading their services. The majority of time when people get employment, if the job match is well made, then the person will eventually become competent and independent in many of the tasks, if not all the tasks at the job. Job coaches will stay involved ongoingly, but will continue to fade their intensive supports as the person becomes competent in those skills. Job coaches also intentionally build positive relationships at work and with coworkers and supervisors, assist with work policies, meet regularly with work supervisors, and communicate regularly with the person in the care planning team. So this is one of the charts that oftentimes is very, very helpful. I'm not going to go through the whole thing since we pretty much covered everything on it, but it's a nice chart to kind of pull out of the presentation and put up on your bulletin board or have easy access to. And like I said, a lot of the changes that we made over the last few years, we've been closely tracking the employment numbers and are really starting to see the employment numbers grow year after year after year. And since 2013-14, we've seen a significant increase, and the numbers as of today are almost at 2,000 more individuals are working and maintaining employment. A lot of the reason for the numbers going up is that people are getting jobs and keeping them. So a lot prior to 2013-14, we saw a lot of people that were not maintaining jobs and then were kind of sitting on our roster for a long period of time and not gaining jobs. That's one of the reasons actually that we added intensive STEM, so that we could assist people in regaining employment if needed under the right circumstances. Okay, now we're going to move on to the care manager and employment services collaboration. The care manager role when working with employment services is typically the following. Through person-centered planning with the person, the care manager, and the care planning team, the care planning team works together to identify vocational employment service needs that match a potential job. So whether the person has had work experiences or not, you know, what are their skills, what have they learned so far, and what do they need to learn, do they need new work experiences, et cetera. The second is to identify and facilitate enrollments in programs that best meet that person's needs. So if they have a little bit of community volunteer work and no discovery, you might consider, the team might, and the person might consider enrolling the person in Pathway to Employment or the Employment Training Program. The third is the care manager will submit the request for service authorization or the service amendment request form. And we'll talk about, there's just a couple little things to know about with those, which we'll talk about in a second. And the fourth is to update the life plan as required. Which services fit the person's skills, experience, and support needs? This is a very, very helpful slide that you might want to keep around as well. Typically, and everybody's different, so you know, this might not work for everybody, but it should be pretty helpful to think about what are the best employment services through this lens. So if you have a person who has no community experience or work experiences and no discovery, then the team may consider, and the person may consider enrolling in Pathway to Employment or community-based pre-vocational services. If the person has limited community or work experiences and no discovery yet, then Pathway or the Employment Training Program may be the best option for that person. ETP has also made their discovery services a little more flexible, and sometimes they also, both Pathway or ETP, might be good for a person who's been in only one job for many, many years, and the new kind of work environment is different if they need to transition to a different job, or they may have been in an enclave or you know, a work experience but not had any kind of comprehensive discovery yet. So most of the time it's people with limited work experiences and no discovery, but occasionally there may be a person who discovery makes sense for, and Pathway or ETP would be those programs. And if the person has fairly significant community work experiences and has completed discovery, then ETP, Access VR, or Intensive SEMP would be the next place to go, or SEMP. And I'll explain the differences between those in a second. So which programs may be combined? We'll talk about the reason to combine programs, but we have built in flexibility into almost all of our new services and enhanced services so that they can work together. Typically, people start off in employment, don't necessarily have all the skills they need to build their career, so we wanted to be able to have services that could help a person move through their first job, then the second job, third job, and each job they may need additional support, additional skills, additional experiences, and so you can kind of combine programs to help that person grow through their career. Community-based pre-vocational services may be combined up to 4 hours a day with half a unit of day-hab or half a unit of site-based pre-voc. And they can also be combined with SEMP and ETP, which, you know, ETP is funded by SEMP, or Pathway. Pathway to Employment services typically wrap around the person's current schedule, or the schedule might be modified a little bit in order to participate in Pathway. So, for example, if a person is full-time in a day habilitation program and they want to participate in Pathway to Employment, they may either go after the day HAB program is done, or they may maybe take 2 half days to do Pathway to Employment temporarily and drop down a couple half days in their day HAB program until Pathway is done. The ETP and supported employment, the situation kind of flips a little. So once a person has gotten a job or identified a job, then the other services really need to wrap around the job. You know, businesses hire people for the times and the hours and the days that they need them, and they're not always super flexible. So a lot of times the other services will now kind of wrap around the job. But ETP and support employment are hourly services, and they may be combined with community-based pre-vocational services, site-based pre-vocational services, Pathway, as long as the person's not in job development, for support employment, and they can combine with day habilitation as well. The reason to combine employment programs is, as we said, sometimes people are building a career. So you might start off with your first job out of high school is working at McDonald's or Walmart, but your goal is to work with animals or childcare or horticulture or clerical, and you really need to get some volunteer work, work experiences, some classes, maybe some maturity, et cetera, in order to eventually move into your kind of chosen career jobs. So you can combine programs such as community-based pre-voc and supported employment in order to continue working on certain skills while you're working a current job as well. Otherwise, individuals, as we all mature and grow, build stamina, we build transportation skills, independence, safety, et cetera, and those can be done in other programs combined, as well as working either a part-time or full-time job. It's important to know that Access VR and OPWDD have a very specific letter of agreement. The majority of OPWDD services are funded through Medicaid waiver. Medicaid requires that all Medicaid services be the payer of last resort. Access VR is a federally funded program which is not Medicaid funded. So if a person needs, initial intensive supported employment and they are eligible for Access VR, they need to go to Access VR at least once in their career. If they have kind of higher support needs, or if they're limited to working part-time, if they have more significant transportation needs, et cetera, Access VR and OPWDD have agreed that ETP, the Employment Training Program, may be accessed instead of Access VR for individuals who need that, kind of initial intensive supported employment services. Once somebody has participated in Access VR or ETP at least once in their career, then they don't have to go back to either one in order to regain employment. So should they lose a job, they don't necessarily have to go back to ETP or Access VR. They can go back to OPWDD, and the employment service would request intensive services, unless it makes sense to go back to ETP or Access VR for a specific reason. Next, we're going to talk about the enrollment process for employment services very briefly. We just touch upon it because we want to get to the life planning process. The enrollment process for employment services. The enrollment process is very much the same as enrolling somebody in almost any other service. It's really the typical process. And just briefly, the care manager completes planning with the person in the care planning team, and kind of decides which services make the most sense at this point with the team and the person. Then submits the service request form if they're brand new to all services, or a request for service amendment, request for service amendment form. And the care manager also submits the most current life plan. The Employment Service Agency will submit the DEP 1 through choices. There are two very specific things that care managers need to remember where they're going to need to work with the employment service to get an OPWDD central office approval number. And those two specific times when they need that number for the service amendment request forms or the service request for service amendment request form, they'll need the number for these two particular instances. And that's when somebody has completed 1 year of pathway to employment services but needs an extension. So individuals that participate in pathway to employment are automatically disenrolled after 1 year. If they need additional time or hours, the Employment Service Agency would submit a request to OPWDD Central Office, and OPWDD Central Office would either approve or disapprove, and if approved, there'll be an approval number. So when the care manager is completing the service amendment request form, there's a spot that asks for that specific number, which the Employment Services Agency can give you the number. That way you don't need to get a hold of the actual form itself or need to be worrying about tracking that down. The other instance is when a person is unemployed. All intensive STEM services, so that's when the person is not employed, all STEM services, intensive STEM services, need to have an authorization number by OPWD central office. So again, you can ask the Employment Service Agency for that number to make sure that those services are approved. Partially the reason that OPWD central office needs to approve those hours is because intensive STEM services are a newer service that was recently added, and it was designed to address all the individuals that were sitting on our roster without jobs for many, many years. And so this is a way that we can kind of manage those funds and make sure that people are, within a year or two are finding jobs and gaining employment, and if not, they're moving to a service where they can address their employment needs and hopefully come back to looking for a job again. Okay, now we move on to the required documentation and the life planning process. So this is a slide you've seen and several other trainings that the life planning process is typical. There's an assessment process that feeds into the life plan, then the life plan feeds into the staff action plan. The service delivery documentation and service records reflect what's listed in the staff action plan. Everything is reviewed and evaluated for progress and for new goals, and the cycle continues every 6 months or 2 a year. The life plan sections, we're going to go through the life plan sections and how they relate to the Employment Services ADMs and what's required, what content is required in the different sections. So as you know, the life plan includes Section 1 is the profile, Section 2 are the personal outcomes and goals, Section 3 is health and safety, as well as other goals, which we'll discuss in a few minutes. Section 4 is where you actually list the waiver services and the requirements for those services, and Section 5 are supports outside of the waiver services. Okay, so how are provider assigned goals determined in Section 2 and or 3 of the life plan? So the process right now is to use person-centered planning with the members of the care planning team and who work together to identify goals and values for kind of all the services, as well as really discuss how often somebody will be working on those particular goals. How often and what's the time frame? So if somebody's learning a new skill, so we think it's going to take 3 months, 6 months, or a year or 2 years. Also, from the requirements of the employment services in the ADM, we have a chart here that lists what the valued outcomes and specific goals that need to be included in the life plan. So again, one of the things that we want to make pretty clear is it doesn't necessarily matter where you include the valued outcomes or goals, or any of the information really that we're talking about. It doesn't matter where, it just needs to be included in the life plan. So sometimes the valued outcomes will be naturally listed in the profile section in Section 1. Other times the care manager and the team may end up putting that a little more clearly in Section 3, where they're talking about what a person needs to accomplish their valued outcomes. So it doesn't matter which section. It could be listed in comments, it could be listed in the profile, it could be listed in specific goals. But what we need to see in the life plans for people that are enrolled in day rehabilitation is a valued outcome that relates to the services that are provided in day have. The valued outcomes and goals don't have to verbatim list these particular set statements, but they need to be similar. They need to closely reference these activities that relate to each specific service. So for day have, as long as the valued outcomes relate to community inclusion or relationship building, informed choice, or building independence, etc., then that's appropriate for that service. For community-based pre-vocational services, the life plan needs to list somewhere that the person is interested in obtaining pre-employment skills, preparation for employment, or job readiness. Again, similar statements, that not verbatim per se, but similar. Pathway to employment needs to include interest in obtaining pre-employment skills, preparation for employment or job readiness, and supported employment needs to have a statement somewhere that is similar to having an interest in competitive employment or self-employment. Oftentimes it might be gaining a job in the community. There is one section that says the person will work on work skills. That's really not specific enough to say the person wants employment in the community or is interested in competitive employment or self-employment. So it needs to be a little bit more specific than just wants to learn work skills. Okay, so more about the goals and valued outcomes in section 3 or 2. Oftentimes, the IM will feed some employment-related goals into section 3. Section 3 is really more about services that help the person, gain the eventual outcomes they want. So if a person wants to eventually rent an apartment or get married or go on a vacation, they need a job in order to pay for those things. It does not matter if the care manager, adds goals to section 2. The IM will feed in goals, but the care manager can add new goals that the team, the care planning team develops, so they can be added to either section 2 or 3. Again, it just needs to be in the life plan, but not in, it's not required to be in a specific section. Section 3 and 2 also includes goals, valued outcomes, provider assigned goals, can be added goals from the care planning meetings, location, the providers, the service type, and then there's specifics around the frequency that specific goals will be implemented. So this doesn't relate to the service. The services that are listed in section 4, the frequency and duration is very different than the frequency, quantity, and time frame in section 2 and 3. In section 2 and 3, we're really talking about the specific goals and activities and things that the service will be working on. So it could be, developing customer service skills. The overall valued outcome is that the person wants to gain, maintain or gain employment or competitive employment, but they may be working on, at the job site, building customer service skills, or they may be working on transportation training to get to the job, or they may be working on increasing productivity at the job, learning new tasks, etc. So frequency, quantity, and time frame will really relate more to each of those specific goals and how the provider, kind of the estimated time frames and the estimated frequency that the provider will work on those specific goals. If you feel that you haven't captured something that's important to, some of the employment services, you can also add that information at the special consideration section. Life plan section 3, like we said, that's safeguards are always included in section 3. Sometimes employment services might pop up in section 3, and either way is perfectly fine. So when it comes to the life plan and safeguards, we want to make sure that the care planning team is looking at all settings. So one of the things that sometimes is different is some safeguards that are important for the person, safety, special diet considerations, things like that. They span different settings, but may be attended to in different ways in different settings. For instance, a person may not travel the community alone yet at this point, so they may not necessarily walk out their door at home, get on the bus and go to the mall, or go to church by themselves yet, but they may be traveling to and from work alone because they've received very specific intensive training to take a bus to and from work, and they've demonstrated that they can be independent and that they have the safety skills to take the bus to and from work on a regular basis. So safety skills and travel can be addressed as a safeguard if needed, and it can be listed that the person under certain circumstances may be able to do activities on their own under the specific circumstances of training, consistency, and demonstrating safety skills, just as one example. It is definitely important and required that if safeguards are in the life plan, that they're also reflected in the staff action plan. Section 4 is when the life plan lists in the life plan where it lists the specific services that the person is enrolled in participating. Under that section, when you list any of the employment services, you'll have an effective date. This is a change from previous ISP. So this date now means the life plan date. So it's typically, whether it's community pre-voc, pathway, SEMP, et cetera, it's typically the date the life plan starts and the date the life plan ends. The only time that there's a change in that is if a service starts in between those dates. So if a person didn't have supported employment, but they started in the middle of the life plan service dates, that would be the enrollment date would be the start date, and the end of the life plan would be the date that life plan, the effective date stops. And then every time the life plan is renewed, those dates become the life plan dates. Unit equals frequency. So when you see frequency on the life plan, that actually means the unit of service. And we have a quick chart, handy-dandy chart for you to look at to see for each service what that means. Same thing with duration. We'll look at that in the chart in a minute. The total units are required on the life plan, and in that section you either list the number of units, or if you're not sure what the number of units that have been authorized through the service authorization letter, you're able to type in 59, so 9999. When it comes to community pre-voc services or pathway, those services tend to be a little more consistent, so it could be 278 hours for pathway, or it could be, if the person's part-time or full-time, what those hourly units look like for the year. Supported employment oftentimes fluctuates. So the first year, if you're doing job development, those units might be much higher, the number of hours much higher. The next year, should the person have gained employment and be successful, they might go down. If the person loses a job, they might go up. So there's a lot of fluctuation in the total unit. So we, recommend either putting unknown, and central office will continue to approve as needed, or if the service authorization letter lists a specific number, you can add that in as well. Again, if you feel like something wasn't captured, or the service provider wants something captured in a specific way, that can be added to the comments just to make sure it's in the life plan. Here's the chart that talks about the unit, which equals frequency, and duration as listed in the service ADMs. So day habilitation requires that the frequency be a day, and the acceptable responses are ongoing. Community-based pre-vocational services are hour or hourly, and OPWDD has determined that the acceptable responses are ongoing or ongoing is authorized. So either one is acceptable. Pathway to employment, again, is hourly or hourly, and the acceptable responses are time limited or time limited for 12 months or 278 hours. Whichever comes first, OPWDD is fine with just time limited. Supported employment is hour or hourly, and the duration is ongoing or ongoing is authorized. The ADMs confirm that the services are authorized. OPWD Central Office authorizes certain services, and the DDROs authorize other services. So that's a process that's outside of the life plan. Okay. So we know the life plan feeds into the staff action plan. We're not going to go into the staff action plan per se right now, but one of the things that you'll talk about in the life plan are goals, supports, and tasks. Goals are teaching a particular task. Supports are something that's provided more ongoingly. So the person may, because of their disability, need ongoing supports, and so that's typically captured under support. And tasks might be a one-time activity. And these goals, tasks, and supports are typically developed in the life planning meetings with the care planning team. The staff action plan has specific requirements, name, Medicaid ID, et cetera. The providers all use these requirements when they develop their staff action plans, which they submit to the care manager. The ADMs also have the specific requirements for each specific service, and so the service providers are looking at this, that they have to make sure that the staff action plans relate to the goals and valued outcomes, that they have carried over the provider assigned goals. They can add more goals, more supports, and more tasks, but they need to make sure that what's in the life plan has been carried over to the staff action plan as well. And again, the staff action plans can provide more detail, based on those overarching goals. So to access more trainings about the life plan and the staff action plan development and the formatting, et cetera, there's many, many resources available on OPWD's website as listed in the slide. And thank you very much for listening to our training today. And if you have any questions related to employment services and the provision of employment services, feel free to contact me.
We will now we'll review the questions that we received in the Q&A and answer what we're able to. All right, everyone. We'll start with some of the questions that we have. So my first question is just regarding the regional office. If Julia could just talk a little bit about within the regional offices contacting OPWDD staff with the questions that come up specific to individuals on your caseload.
Mm-hmm. There's an employment coordinator in every DDRO who can also assist. There's also ETP supervisors available in each DDRO. So individual specific questions about what's the right service, or if they are not able to get into a service, then what would be the next option. So you can easily go to your DDRO, either the employment coordinators or the ETP supervisors with those questions.
If someone lives in an IRA, is the IRA responsible for transportation to get the person to and from paid employment? Can someone living in an IRA use Medicaid transportation to get to and from their job?
So to the best of my knowledge, Medicaid transportation is really just for medical appointments. And we've checked a few times, and it sounds like a great idea, but it is not allowed. It's not allowed for employment at this point. So Medicaid transportation for medical appointments is not billable for a ride to your job.
Clinical justification is needed, right?
Mm-hmm, yep. And the IRA question, IRAs are not required. However, again, there's, if possible, there are lots of people who do get a ride either to work or home from work or halfway to the job. So there's a lot of creativity and flexibility that the whole care planning team needs to do in order to help people get employment and find transportation to their jobs. So it's not required, but it is possible. And it really kind of depends on also the IRA, how big, how many people are there, what are the role with staff and how busy they are, et cetera.
One of the other questions we received was if you could clarify explicitly about the acceptance of having employment services listed in either Section 2 or 3 of the Life Plan.
Employment services can be listed in Section 2 or 3 of the Life Plan 100%. Again, the Life Plan, if you really want to look at it as one document and one big document, there's nowhere in the Employment Services ADM that say in Section 3 you must list, this specific thing. It really says in the Life Plan. So the important thing is, it needs to say somewhere in the Life Plan that the person wants a job in the community, or they want to work on the, the valued outcomes that we listed in that chart. That's very, very important that that's listed somewhere. Again, it could be Section 1, 2, or 3. All the employment goals can end up in Section 3, or they can be in Section 2 and 3. So it does not matter where things are as long as the requirements are found somewhere in the Life Plan.
Great, thanks. Another question that came in repeatedly, and I know that we've answered here through technical assistance, is the issue with ongoing as authorized or ongoing as the duration. So, Julia, can you just reiterate for everybody what is acceptable in a life plan, and if any of the, when the ADMs will be updated, but what's allowed in the interim.
So OPWDD has made the decision that ongoing is acceptable for services that require ongoing as authorized in the ADM. So that's why in those charts that we've given, it says ongoing or ongoing as authorized. The ADMs are kind of being updated in the next year. Supported employment should be coming out fairly soon, community pre-voc fairly soon, and then pathway after that. So hopefully next year, year and a half or so, we'll be seeing the updated ADMs. But we did get clarification that ongoing or time-limited are acceptable. So that chart should say or. If you want to put it in the comments, the additional information, that's fine, if that makes you feel more comfortable. But either way is acceptable.
Great. The SEMP ADM requires that all allowable services are part of the habilitation plan / staff action plan. How do you suggest this be captured in the life plan?
So the SEMP ADM says that in the staff action plan, all allowable services should be listed, not the life plan. And if there's agencies on this call that do employment services, we recommend that there at least be one statement that says, you know, with all, in relation to the goals listed, you can either list it every time with each goal, or you can make one statement that says, with all the goals listed here in employment services, all allowable services, whether it's support employment or pre-voc, et cetera, may be provided in support of these goals, or you can list it individually with each specific goal. But it's just because employment services just are so flexible. You know, one day the person has a job, the next day they might not have a job, and your whole role changes on a dime. Or, you know, you may have lots of things listed and that person is on workman's comp, and then you're helping them get their benefits and get back in, ready to get back into work. So it's really one of those services that changes a lot. So we do recommend in the staff action plan, not the life plan, that there be reference that all allowable services may be provided in support of the goals listed in the staff action plan.
Great, thank you. I have one more of just talking about the chart on slide 34 that went through the unit. There's a question about noticing that the frequency on the chart for pathway to employment is listed as day, and just trying to clarify between the difference of how it's billed, that it's an hourly service.
Yes.
Billed in 15.
That needs to be fixed.
Oh, okay. All right, so that should be listed on the chart as hour or hourly.
Yep.
Okay, so we can correct that on the PowerPoint materials
Thank
that
you.
are shared and posted to the site. Thank you to the person that gave that comment. Okay, and then I have a question.
One other question that came in, Julia, is ETP considered a HCBS waiver service?
ETP is literally supported employment. It's funded 100% through supported employment. The majority of individuals in supported employment are funded through HCBS waiver. There's a few, small number of people who have been grandfathered prior to 2015 that are state-funded supported employment services. But ETP literally is just kind of an option in supported employment. It's typically for people who have, who are not employed and, you know, need higher supports and may go through ETP instead of Access VR, or they're individuals that kind of need a foot in the door and they want to learn kind of a new career, new skills, or they might need that discovery, that brief modified discovery. So it's really an extremely innovative program. It's very flexible. It's you know, been redesigned around people's needs. But it literally is part of supported employment, a part of SEMP, and it's 100% SEMP funded. The wages themselves are funded by the state, but all the services are billed and funded through supported employment.
So just to add a question to that, it would be listed as ETP in Section 4 of the life plan, or would it be listed as SEMP in Section 4 of the life plan with a note in the profile section that they're receiving ETP services?
I like how you fed me the answer. Yes, she's right. Yes, you would list ETP as supported employment, It's time limited as well. So once a person gets an internship and is hired by the business, then you're in extended supported employment. So it's, you don't need to worry about intensive or extended at all. It's really just listed as supported employment. And in the notes section, you can state that the person is participating, comments or notes section, the person is participating at this point in ETP. You can also, under supports, which is section, the very last section of the life plan.
Oh, in the 100% state-funded supports is section.
You can list that the wages, ETP wages are under 100% state funded, but the services themselves are under supported employment.
Thank you, Julia.
I have a question for you, Angie, just to speak to a county-specific issue of some providers that feel they can't sign a life plan unless the quantity, duration, and frequency section in section 2 or 3 are listed as needed. So just some advice on how to navigate these concerns.
Sure, and this is Angie Francis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the statewide coordinator of care management. OPWDD has set, you know, as we typically do, we set the minimum required standards. If agencies set that bar higher, then you need to follow, you know, what is set. But I can tell you that in sections 2 and 3 of the life plan, as needed is an option for the frequency, quantity, or duration. Now, that being said, as Julia discussed, section 2 and 3 is really to get down to the detail of how often a provider, whether it's an employment service provider or other, will be working with an individual to achieve the goals that they want to. So as needed might be appropriate, but oftentimes it might not. So care managers, we obviously ask that you make sure that the life plan is understandable and that the goals are something that can be achieved. So, you know, OPWDD allows for as needed, but again, if other providers are looking for more specific detail so that they can track and monitor the goals that they're implementing, then the care planning team needs to work together as a whole. Two other things, two other questions that came in several times. I just want to provide some additional clarification and guidance around it. And it's specifically about the safeguards and the goals and supports that are listed in the life plan, and then how that transitions into a staff action plan. So as Julia stated on, let's see, I think it's slide 37, the staff action plan must contain the individual's my goal/valued outcome from the life plan, and also has to list the provider assigned goals and or supports that are in the life plan. And then ultimately what the HAB providers do in the staff action plan is provide the additional detail that clarifies the meaning and the intent of those goals and valued outcomes and how they will support the person to achieve them and what the staff will do to help the person achieve them. So that is not to say that there can be new or added goals and safeguards in a staff action plan that do not exist in a life plan. What is in the life plan is the overarching plan. So that's kind of the driving plan. And what goes into the staff action plan is the detail. So staff action plans should not have goals and supports or safeguards that are not referenced in the life plan. So I just wanted to provide that clarification on that. We get that question a lot, and it's a transition period. There are new documents, new processes, so you know, during this transition period, each life plan and staff action plan that gets developed will get better and better every time we review them and update them and move forward with our transformation.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we'll pause for one more minute to review the questions that we have, and then we'll conclude today's session. Okay, so we have our last two questions, and then we'll conclude for today. As I said at the beginning, this PowerPoint will be available within several days and the recording, so if there are things that you want to reference or listen to again, please feel free. So to finish, just a review for ETP, is a staff action plan required?
Because, as we said, ETP is funded by Supported Employment SEMP services, all SEMP requirements must be met. So SEMP, to participate in SEMP, you obviously have to be enrolled, you need a life plan, you need staff action plan, specific documentation, et cetera. So everything that's required by SEMP is also required with ETP. ETP also has some additional documentation, and the ETP supervisors can walk you through that.
Great, thank you. And also just to review, is it okay for the concept to be captured? Does the wording have to match verbatim?
For the valued outcomes?
Yes, for the valued outcome.
So you want the valued outcomes to sound as fairly similar to what's listed in the ADMs. So a job in the community sounds similar to wanting competitive employment. I would say, one of the drop-down boxes in Section 3 is to work on work skills. I would say that's not quite specific enough to say the person wants a job in the community. So you really want the same intent of that language to be in there, but it doesn't have to be verbatim.
So it doesn't have to be word for word, but it should have the same meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to conclude today's information session. Just a reminder that our next session will be on April 24th, and it will be on self-direction. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend today. Have a great afternoon.